Well, welcome back, everybody. I'm Erin Butler. I started Commit and Conquer coaching specifically for helping individuals who are undergoing marital crisis. You are now on lesson two of our online coursework for dealing with trauma, infidelity, and marital crisis. And today's topic, we're going to be talking about the effects of and dealing with trauma. Um, Typically, coaching is more of a mindset of like looking through a windshield. We're always moving forward. We're looking out ahead. How can we get to our destination? Occasionally, we will look in the rearview mirror and check things from our past to change lanes, to maybe make adjustments. But the goal isn't necessarily to reflect upon the past. I think that's where great therapists, psychologists, even psychiatric care can be incredibly helpful for dealing with past trauma if you've not done any of that kind of work. But we have to realize that if we are talking about habitual sin or even chronic low grade marital issues building over time can create trauma, right? We feel like we know the outcome before it's even happened. So we're almost writing our own future. And we have to take our thoughts captive, be aware that that's what we're doing so that we can deal with it in a healthy way. And we will talk about some coping techniques as well. So, getting started here, we really need to understand that we have to heal the things that have happened to us to be able to move forward. And what that really kind of looks like is identifying and naming what the trauma is. So many times people don't even know that they had a traumatic past. I know for me, there were things that happened in my childhood that I just thought were normal. And I remember friends in high school and college saying, "Hey, that wasn't a normal experience." Or, "Yeah, maybe the way you were treated in this situation is not necessarily something we see a lot from maybe a parent-child relationship," or whatever it may be. And that was the beginning seeds to realize I even had a problem so that I could go and get treatment for it. So you do have some deep-rooted stuff that can come out of childhood. Actually, I had a therapist I worked with that had a great saying that like 99% of the problems in our marriages today occurred between the ages of 0 and 18. And really, that just is whatever we learned at a young age from our parents, we end up using and transferring into our current relationships. And then if that relationship fails, we layer on the challenges there and take it to the next relationship. It just becomes a baggage type of situation we pull along our lives. And we need to learn to sever the caboose, like get rid of the baggage so that we can actually run forward, right, with a race of endurance. So it can be old things that come from the past, but even what you're dealing with currently in your relationship, even if it is an infidelity, right? We all know infidelity, it's kind of like a given. Of course, this is an incredible betrayal and it causes unbelievable pain. So, yes, that is the trauma in and of itself. But that betrayal can actually bring forth old traumas too. So, an example would be like a client that I had, though her husband always said we take divorce off the table, has never made any comment about ever leaving the family because she experienced it from her parents. Her dad left her mom and her pretty high and dry, no financial support in a different country, really was not even communicated much about it, just felt truly abandoned. So she's carrying that wound into her current marriage and actually even treating her husband as though this is going to happen. So this is a way of projecting a past hurt onto a current hurt. So identify where you are maybe in the trauma process. Is it really just a brand new trauma like infidelity? Is infidelity bringing up old past trauma, or are you hanging on to old trauma that's not active in a today's state that is affecting your decision making for the go forward? So, how does it really show up? And I just touched on this on the last slide, but of course, I'll go into a little more detail here. And it distorts our thoughts. So that's the biggest thing is we automatically presume something before it's happened, or we presume our spouse is going to do or say something that hasn't happened. So it's almost like you are scorekeeping against your spouse that can never get ahead because either those things haven't happened or you're already making reactive decisions to something that again the spouse has not done. So that other spouse can feel disheartened. They can feel like they can never win. So many times those individuals over a course of time will just withdraw and retreat. And that makes that person what? Feel even more alone and abandoned and like they don't care. So it's kind of that negative cycle, the vicious cycle of kind of spiraling down whenever you don't have the right perspective. And it's incredibly important to realize that it matters how we see something. I think a great illustration of this is for me, I was in Israel and I had this great Messianic Jewish leader walking us through the ancient temple of David. And they were showing us some of the sites. And she turned around and she asked a group of 10 of us, she said, "Who can tell me something about David?" And I remember the first thing I did is I raised my hand real high and I said, "He had an affair." And she just kind of looked at me with a very soft face, but just said, or that he was yes, but how about that he was a man after God's own heart? And I remember thinking, kind of shrinking back a little bit, like, oh, yeah. But I think we all have a tendency to do that. We project the worst case scenario, or we take the one bad thing and we just label it and it covers up the whole marriage or the whole person, the whole identity. And when you do that, you really can't address the problem. You're trying to attack the person. So we have to change our thoughts so we address and find solutions for our problems by attacking the problem, not the person. So the importance of, finding the root cause of your trauma is so that you can realize how your perspective has been distorted. So that's number one. Number two, it creates barriers. So as I just talked about, that kind of vicious cycle, if you're acting this out within a relationship of the context of marriage, you can see how somebody would be really afraid of how am I going to be able to move forward when I have this person who's lashing out all the time or making comments that they're just going to up and leave or even saying comments that are insecurities, right? Like, oh, you're just going to abandon me. Or it could be a myriad of things, but that creates barriers. Now, it also can be a great opportunity for bringing oneness, vulnerability, transparency, to be able to share our emotions. So it can be a really good thing if we know how to communicate. But as we all know, right, the number one challenge in marriage many times is communication. So knowing if we don't have great communication skills and both partners are there to listen and learn, then realistically, we automatically internalize. We believe it's about us, that we are the problem, even when the other person's just talking about their own issues. We think we've made a mistake, which makes us defensive. And so the cycle continues. So it does create barriers. We never want to put our spouse in a place of trying to meet expectations that were really never even communicated, or to jump over hurdles of things that happened before the relationship but are now in place due to past hurts, right? That just creates further challenges in the relationship. So obviously really important areas to talk about. Now we're going to move into how it shows up. And I think this is where many of you are probably saying, yes, I'm feeling this. I feel validated. I feel seen right now. Because these are the common trauma responses you see out of people. It certainly can manifest in other ways. And sometimes it's hard to diagnose because some people repress it so much. It does take some time, some digging to identify, is this a trauma response? And what have I been learning about my what we call our adaptive child. Gary Thomas actually has a great book on this, Fierce Intimacy, you can read. But our adaptive child is the person that we created as a child to deal with the daily issues of life, the things that happen to us as a kid. But as we become an adult, we need to learn how to become mature and emotionally regulate and have emotional maturity. And so many times people are never pushed into doing that, or they don't even know it's an option. So they don't have the tools, so they don't even know the signs. So I think it's important to realize, hey, we've needed that, young a child that was in survival mode at that time, but you no longer need that adolescent anymore. You need the mature, responsible one that can emotionally deal with hard things and know how to cope from a healthy standpoint, and then regulate so that the communication can happen between the person that there's a challenge with. So some of these that you've probably seen and heard of would be hypervigilance. And that is very common after betrayal. You're seeking out, looking for ways in which you're going to be hurt again. You might even be testing your partner. And of course, this can happen even without specific, betrayal. It can even be a betrayal of emotional abandonment. It could be maybe a spouse has done something that was not safe for children, and that makes another parent very uncomfortable. And so, hypervigilance is just like the brain's way of trying to piece together a new picture that is clear outline of how I can control the future. And as we all know, control is an illusion. So, hypervigilance is your brain's way trying to regain some control, but the truth is that we're really trying to create new neural pathways, and that means it does take a little time for your brain to put together the new pieces of the puzzle so that you aren't going into this constant looking for issues, because typically that keeps us on our toes. We're very stressed. Our stomachs usually get messed up. We can't sleep well. We lash out at our partners. So some of this is very common right after, a major trauma that happens in a marriage. But we don't want to get stuck there, right? And we see a lot of people get stuck in this place, and we want to see people move through that. Many people ask me, well, how long does it take? It totally depends on the level of previous trauma for the individual, how deep the betrayal was, what is currently happening inside the home to make it safe. Um, so all of those things do matter. So it's hard to put a timeline on it. But if you have any specific questions, feel free to reach out to me. And hearing your story, I certainly be happy to kind of give you some guidance on, hey, are we stuck or are we not? Bullet number two is emotional flooding or shutting down. This is painful for a person to observe because you see the damage of our choices and how they impact the people around us. And emotional flooding is just a completely irrational, unprovoked, unexpected wave of emotion. It can be sobbing, it can even be anger. Sometimes it is just shutting down, where literally the brain almost shuts off and the person isn't even aware of themselves. They almost disassociate with their mind and their body because of the hurt that they're feeling. It's just too intense. One of the things that I've learned through all this time going through infidelity and the trainings and in leading people through these difficult things is that many times, we have to learn to increase our tolerance to pain. And I know that sounds counterproductive, but the truth is life is constantly degrading. It's falling apart, right? Our kids are getting older. We're getting older. Spouses are getting ill. Our world is falling apart, right? Our homes are degrading. Relationships are in a constant fluctuation. The only thing stable is God. And so, if we're really relying on our environment to always be in a pretty stable, set place, and we are avoiding suffering, we're avoiding pain, then when it does come, because it will, right? It it affects us more than it would affect somebody else who maybe has gone through hard things. And that's one of the things they talk about. People who have been through hard things are more resilient. You can tolerate more pain and discomfort without having such an emotional reaction to it. So that flooding or shutdown. And there's some tools and tips on how to be able to do that when you are in a state of suffering. Physical symptoms, we all know this, right? I mean, of course, insomnia. This, of course, is when your body needs the most rest. You need more sleep. You need to be aiming for like 8 hours if you've undergone something emotionally intense. But many times it's very hard to find. Chest tightness, so it can feel like you're even having a heart attack. Tingling down the arms on the left hand side typically is one of those signs of an actual heart attack, versus a tightness of your chest usually is panic, anxiety. Anxiety can start and then panic usually comes secondary. The best thing to do in those situations is just to be aware that, name it, say, okay, I am having a panic attack. this is real, but it's not going to last forever. And then do something that will bring you back to that moment. Hold a piece of ice in your hand and count until it melts all the way through. That will bring you back to center. There's some YouTube videos out there on tapping, some tapping exercises. You tap your forehead, tap certain parts of your body to bring awareness to those areas. That will really help from experiencing an onset of a panic attack. Of course, fatigue, right? If you're not sleeping, you're going to be exhausted. And so this is very typical. You need to create more boundaries and barriers to give yourself time to recover when you're going through a trauma response. So maybe saying no to some of those extracurricular activities. Maybe it is asking for some flexibility in your workday so that you can slow down and be aware of yourself so you don't run up against a wall and the panic attacks and those sort of things kind of hit you unexpectedly. So take care of yourself. And then this last one is like difficulty trusting even safe people. And that just comes from, right, when you've been betrayed and you weren't expecting it, your world flips upside down and you don't know what's true anymore. And because of that, everything can be questioned now. And if you're feeling that, just know that it is a normal part of the process. It is a survival instinct to protect yourself. But knowing that that's what's going on, that in reality, we can never fully trust any one person. What we do is we choose to love people, and we'll learn about this more later, but love is an action, and that to not risk anything is really just to lock ourselves up and to feel no love, no joy, no happiness. It would be to be emotionally shut off from everyone. And that is a really miserable way to live. So, to experience the highs, we do have to experience the lows. And, you will get through this period of not being able to trust people. It is a temporary experience. So, um, these again are protective measures for your body, very common. So the next topic we'll touch on will be the brain and trauma. We'll keep this very high level, and most people have seen and heard of these terms, right? Fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Very easy to remember, but this is what happens when you have the um, chemical a discombobulation happens. So, because trauma basically is telling your brain something is wrong, it now says we need to figure out how to make it right or to get safe. And so you will see people who will lash out and want to fight, a lot of anger, want to protect themselves or protect their children. That's one response. Flight is to run. You definitely see that. Certainly, I have experienced it in my own marriage where my husband wanted to just leave the situation immediately and distance himself. That can also backfire, right? Because now you're creating a longer period of healing because you're running from the problem. Because the problem doesn't go away if you run. Um, I didn't touch on that with fight, but right, anger can lead to sin, which means abuse, hurting people, saying things we can't take back. So right, there's normalcy in some of these things, but they can also be taken to an extreme and become something that's detrimental. Freeze is less running away, but it's still shutting down. So again, you're no longer participating or cooperating in the communication and the relationship. You're not dealing with the issues. You just kind of shut down. Sometimes depression can kind of feel like this, but when it's trauma, it's an initial, what I would call an acute onset versus depression, which is what we call chronic. It's more of a long-term feeling of malaise. Freeze is more like a shock and a shutdown. And then, of course, fawn. Fawn is a little more unique. It really is, it's the prefrontal cortex. The reasoning center is no longer working like it's supposed to. So, you react in a way that would seem very opposite of the situation. So it could be that I tell my partner, "Hey, I've had an affair," and that person is so freaked out, their brain goes into haywire, and they end up fawning all over me, trying to get closeness to get a form of reassurance. And that obviously is not healthy either because I am no longer a safe person. And so, for that individual to be able to have their own boundaries and emotional capacity to hold themselves separate to absorbing my emotional energy to try to reassure themselves is really important too. So typical things that you do see here. And there are different ways you can emotionally regulate to help with the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And you can actually put that into YouTube and you'll get different videos on how to bring yourself back to center. EDM, or EMDR, I'm sorry. EMDR is another great resource for people who have undergone trauma, and it just seems to kind of keep coming back up. They feel like they're living most of their day pretty normal, but then all of a sudden, it rears its ugly head. And so EMDR is supposed to kind of link the past and those neural pathways that maybe aren't fully healed to new ones and help you like face it and then process it to be able to move forward. So we're going to do um, a little activity after we talk about why we avoid or when we avoid traumas and why they backfire. I touched on some of them, but just prepare yourself. We're going to do like a mini reflection, and you're going to take a few minutes and do the prompt and write out a potential trauma that's happened to you and how it keeps showing up in your life. And so when we're looking at these, see if this is something that you identify with, that this might be happening in your life currently. So, distorted perceptions of reality, right? The outside world says everything's fine. There's no issue here. Maybe you've got a friend who's speaking into a situation that says, I don't see it, but you see it. You say, this is going on. No one else sees it. It could be a distortion. It could be that somebody doesn't have the full picture. Your friends might not have the full picture. That is possible. But friends, they have a good intention to be looking out for you. And a good friend that's unbiased, that really wants the best for you, is going to tell you truth and love, even things that might be hard to hear. And so they may be sharing something with you saying, like, I don't see what you're experiencing because they're not emotionally invested in it. So hear what others have to say is really important in your community. You do need to have a safe community to find out, are my perceptions wrong? And maybe my reality is not as I thought it is. Much like I did when I was younger, thinking that my childhood was completely normal, finding that it actually really wasn't the healthiest environment. Do you quickly misinterpret your partner's actions? So you kind of feel on edge. They bring you flowers and you automatically say, what did you do? What happened? That sort of thing can be a trauma. It can also just be that you've lost trust in your spouse. Doesn't necessarily have to be a trauma, but that could be another identifier that if you're constantly misreading your partner's actions and automatically assuming the worst, could be a sign of trauma. Emotional overreaction to minor triggers. So things that we should be able to get over pretty quickly, right? Relationships are messy. They are never going to be perfect. Your spouse is never going to say and do the right thing, and neither are you. So there has to be a level of emotional degree of separation, so lack of codependency, where you are able to say, all right, this, I didn't like that situation, but I can tell now it's not the time to deal with it. And we can talk about it maybe Sunday when the kids aren't around, that sort of thing. So if you're feeling like you're overreacting, very sensitive to small things, that can certainly be a sign of a trauma that you have. And these things build over time, right? If we avoid it, these things become more and more active in our lives. And then vulnerability. This is a huge one. See it a lot in both men and women, but those that have been basically told either you're a man, you don't show any feelings. So when something really happens, they just completely stuff it down. They may not even know that they were supposed to process, deal, grieve with that situation and work through the trauma of it. And so when they enter into a relationship, they don't even know how to connect. They don't know how to have, emotional intimacy with their partner. And that can lead to a lot of disconnection. And so if you feel uncomfortable to talk about your emotions, to be vulnerable with your partner, that could potentially be a sign of been avoiding dealing with your trauma in the past. So let's move forward with the little mini prompt exercise here. So how has trauma shown up for me? So just take a couple minutes right now, write down 2 ways you've noticed trauma that's been affecting your life. Could be your thoughts, it could actually have already progressed into your actions. It can be from, an actual infidelity, for those of you watching this course experiencing that. Could be years of chronic neglect in a marriage, or it could be things that have happened prior to the relationship now or where you are today, that is affecting today's relationships or affecting you as an individual. So go ahead and take that time right now. Okay, we'll give another 10 seconds here. All right, so set that aside. If you didn't get to finish it, you'll obviously have time after the coursework to do that. But now let's go into how do we start to fix these things. So here are some tools for soothing your trauma responses that you've been experiencing. Um, Deep breathing. I know it sounds so simple, and when it's going on, you're thinking to yourself, is that really going to help me? But when you're kind of in that, it, I have to do something at this moment, and otherwise I'm going to lose it. It is very helpful. And so you probably have heard of terms called circular breathing. I think the Navy SEALs do a certain breathing technique that works very well. It's 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out. 4 seconds in, you just keep going around and around. And so, again, what you're doing is you're bringing your mind and your body back together. That's really important. So, it's kind of doing a body scan. I think Navy SEALs do that too, even for their sleep, as they stretch their body really big, stretch out as big and tall as you can. And then as you relax, you visualize the each part of your body kind of shutting down from the top of your head, going over your eyes, down your chin, all the way to your toes. And then at that point, typically you will find that you are feeling more and more relaxed and not feeling as triggered in that moment. When you are feeling a big, strong emotions and it kind of feels like, why is this coming up? Name it. Name that emotion. Share what is exactly going on at that time. I am feeling ticked off because of this. Sometimes people like to journal. I do like journaling, but I'm a very fast thinker. So for me, I find that just writing a singular word really helps when I'm feeling a lot of things. So anger, frustration, fear, sadness, and I just keep going until I run out of words. And that's a fast way for me to be able to process my emotions out loud, and I'm writing them down. So again, that's bringing my mind and my body back together. Safe physical touch. So pets are wonderful. There's so many studies showing how an animal can really calm down the nervous system when you're going through difficult things. So if you have a pet, grab your pet, pet them. Or if you really want to, you can go outside and play with them. Physical exercise is incredibly important. So I would recommend going on walks as well. If you have a friend or if your partner is safe to do this with, sometimes physical touch from your partner is helpful. For me, I want my partner to be able to put their hand on my knee or my shoulder when I'm feeling really overwhelmed. I don't want them to come into my space. I just want them to reassure me with one hand on my knee or my shoulder. Other people don't want that. So identify what it is that you want. Many people sleep with weighted blankets today. They can be incredibly comforting if you're feeling overwhelmed and heightened. Again, this is bringing that sensory element back to the skin. You're feeling the weight, and it's causing a release of, serotonin, dopamine, those, chemicals that make us feel safer and bring us back to a place of centeredness. And then I absolutely believe in reading the Bible, prayer, meditating, we talked about taking those distorted thoughts. Well, we want to take those thoughts captive, realize the things that we're saying to ourselves that might be adding to our trauma responses, and taking them captive, saying, no, God does not say that about me, and rejecting those things, and then inputting back into your brain the things that He does says, that He knows about every hair on your head, how much that He wants to please you and bless you in this life. So remembering those things will really help you be able to move forward and grounding yourself so that you don't react and you can respond thoughtfully. We're going to actually move into another activity. So we want you to build your own trauma toolkit. Um, so I think what would be great here is to get your little notebook out, or, if you're a very digitally savvy person, whip out that iPhone, and make yourself a notes list and put down the things that are helpful for you. Going for walks, the tapping exercises, maybe it is starting EMDR. Talking to a friend, very important. Having a social community around you is essential in recovering from something like this. Maybe your local church has a small group that you can join and you can share a little bit about what's going on, and you can join them. Meetup has some great online tools where you can do online or virtual meetup groups that have certain topics around healing, and other times it's just about talking or meeting new people and hearing their stories. That's another great way of, finding people, feeling connected, because isolation will absolutely make your trauma 10 times worse. So really important to do that. So take just a minute here and just start jotting down a few things that you feel like would make you feel safe again. When these feelings come up, this way you're prepared, you can pull out your list and you can go through them one after another. If the first one doesn't work, move on to the next one, depending on what that trigger is. So go ahead and start that now. I'll give you just about 30 seconds. About 5 seconds here. All right. And as we close out this lesson here, we want to talk about how do we move forward after we do our trauma work, and those sort of things. And it's just important to realize that once we can name, deal with, and move forward past our trauma, then you're actually able to rebuild the trust and start working on your marriage. So I do have this early on in the coursework because it is important to deal with. And so if you really feel like you have undealt with trauma and you're still kind of stuck after kind of going through this initial overview, I definitely recommend getting in with a therapist, someone who specializes in trauma work, PTSD, that sort of thing. Use the tools that previously discussed. You need to communicate your needs really clearly to your partner, letting them know what's going on. Um, and then utilize the tools for self-regulation, right? That's the goal, to be able to do that. And as you do this more and more and more, it will be a whole lot easier to have a constructive conversation versus moving into a destructive conversation with your partner. So you're practicing new things, so it becomes a new way of being, right? So habits take about, 21 days to form, and we want to be able to stick with this process consistently enough that it now becomes second nature. And that's incredibly essential to, creating marriage 2.0, or it could be, if you're watching this as an individual, to be the person that you kind of want to be, right? To be a really well-rounded individual that can be there for others emotionally, as well as not necessarily let every single thing affect you as an individual, so that you can be present for the individuals that you might be helping. So I would just say, before we close here, make a commitment to yourself that I will nurture my healing this week in X way. So pick one of those things that you're going to do, or maybe it's just some self-care tools, and say, okay, I'm going to commit to this one tangible, achievable item that I'm going to use as a tool for lasting change into my life and potentially even my marriage. So healing is absolutely worth the work. Um, It is all about seeing yourself as a new improved person, that you are not broken beyond repair. It may be trauma, may be a part of your story, it may be infidelity, but much like Jesus, right? He's a bruised reed. He bends, but he does not break. And that's what I want for all of us, right? It can feel like we're totally broken, but in reality, we're learning how to become malleable, flexible, bendable, so that we don't stay in these rigid confines that society tells us to be in, but that we have some flexibility so that we can weather the storm, right? Trees with deep roots, strong branches that can bend and flex in a storm are going to survive versus, rigid buildings that aren't built for storms. They're going to crumble because they just have too much rigidity, because this is how life should look and work. And we get so disappointed when, the things happen in our lives that are going to happen. So I'm so glad you're investing in your future by continuing this coursework, and we'll see you in the next lesson. Thanks again.